Hello everybody, I'm Sean from Follow the Camino, and on this episode of Camino Talks, I'm delighted to be talking with two people from the American Pilgrims on the Camino. In Virginia, in the United States, is David Donselar, who's the chairperson of that society, and also in Tucson, Arizona, is Carmen Marriott, who is the vice-chairperson of the American Pilgrims on the Camino. Welcome, David and Carmen.
Thank you very much.
So I'm going to kind of talk briefly to each of you, just ask you to kind of introduce yourself. So David first, who is David Donselar and what is your connection with the American Pilgrims on the Camino?
Sure. I currently have the pleasure of chairing the American Pilgrims on the Camino Board of Directors. I've been a member of the board since about 2017. And so I lead an 11-member all-volunteer board of directors and an organization comprised almost entirely of volunteers to carry out our mission. And so it's been, I walked the Camino back in 2013 and quickly, like most of the folks who've walked the Camino, I was bitten by the Camino bug, and I've been involved ever since. Just a wonderful community of people, and certainly a great organization to be a part of.
Okay, thank you. And Carmen, tell me a little bit about yourself, please.
I am the vice chair of American Pilgrims on the Camino. I've been on the board for about 5 years. I've walked a Camino every year since 2014, except for this year. They've been canceled. And I have been very much involved with the grants program of our organization. And I've served as the secretary and the vice chair for this great organization.
Okay, thank you. So Carmen, I'll stay with you. Can you maybe describe a little bit about the work of the American Pilgrims on the Camino, what it stands for and what its purpose is?
Well, we have a pretty broad mission. It's kind of threefold, and I'll read it to you. It's to foster the enduring tradition of the Camino by supporting its infrastructure, by gathering pilgrims together, and by providing information and encouragement to past and future pilgrims. That's our mission. And the things that we do to support that mission include our grants program that I talked about. It includes our chapters. We have over 60 chapters in the United States. It includes our annual gathering, where we usually gather between 200 and 300 pilgrims together and inform them, both past and future pilgrims, about the Camino.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of chapters, you say about 60 chapters across the US. What does a chapter do on a monthly basis or weekly basis?
Well, it's we don't call them franchises. Everybody does their own thing. But it ranges from hikes to weekly coffees, to presentations, to packing tips, to the history of the Camino, preparing yourself for the Camino, both spiritually and physically, and introducing new pilgrims to veteran pilgrims and allowing veteran pilgrims to share their stories. I think Dave can probably talk about this a little more than I can. We had over 700 events last year between the 60 chapters, and more than 12,000 people attending these events in different capacities.
Okay, thank you, Carmen. So David, on that, new pilgrims and talk to experienced pilgrims, a lot of people have never heard of the Camino. How do they kind of get involved with this group? And if you tell them, oh, it's a long walk in Spain, what makes them actually want to do that?
Sure. Well, we just actually, in the past year and a half or so, we implemented a new vision for the organization. So we went through a period where as we went through this sort of enormous growth, I mean, we went from 5 chapters in the 2011 timeframe up to 60 chapters now. We took a chance to sort of sit down and reassess what we wanted to do. And so we came up with our vision statement, which is, and again, I'll read this to you. We inspire all who seek the spirit of the Camino to join the global community of pilgrims. And we chose those words pretty carefully. And we spent a lot of time, for example, on the word inspire. You know, should we really be in the job of trying to inspire people? And then we focused on the words "who seek," and because we think that part is actually pretty important. And so there's, I think, particularly these days, there's a real desire out there to be part of a community. And anybody that's heard of or walked on the community knows that there are people from all walks of life, all backgrounds, and the people of Spain just willing to reach out and help those folks as they go for whatever reason on this journey. And so we think as an organization, it's just really important to inspire anybody who seeks that sort of sense of community to reach out and talk to other people who've sort of been there and done that, to encourage them as they go on their way in whatever they're looking for. And we talked about this spirit of the Camino. So we inspire all who seek the spirit of the Camino. We actually had a facilitator tell us about the spirit of the Camino, and we said, where did you find that phrase? And oddly enough, it's actually on the credential itself. And so it's a poem that was written not too, I guess, top of my head, Carmen, maybe you have that date.
I do.
Do you have that date? What is it?
I think it was at the 2007 board meeting.
Okay, yeah. So it was adopted by the board, and it's actually printed on every American Pilgrim's credential, and it says, "Live in the moment, welcome each day, its pleasures and its challenges, make others feel welcome, share, feel the spirit of those that have gone before you, imagine those that will follow you, and appreciate those that will walk with you today." Those words really struck us as a board. And so we bake that into our vision because we think it captures what that spirit of community is all about. And then we ended it with the global community of pilgrims. We, as an organization, don't just reach out to paid members. We reach out to all pilgrims who want to be part of that community, encourage them to take part in chapter events and other things, national gatherings, that sort of thing. To just become part of the community. So that's sort of our thinking on that.
Okay, thank you. And Carmen, what makes a pilgrim? Are they religious? Are they spiritual? Are they looking for an answer? Are they looking for exercise?
I think all of the above. And I've listened to you talk a couple of times on walking and the benefits of walking, both from a physical, a mental, and a spiritual perspective. And a pilgrim is anybody who's interested in taking that first step to becoming a pilgrim. We consider a pilgrim if you come to the first meeting of a chapter. Again, you don't have to be a member, but you have enough interest to find out about what the Camino is about. And that's the first step. Second step is asking for a credential. And that really kind of solidifies the fact that you are going to do a pilgrimage. You're going to go to Santiago, or you're going to at least begin to walk a pilgrimage. And we don't discriminate. If you walk with a backpack, if you walk and you take a taxi, however mode you're going to do it, if you're on the Camino, you are a pilgrim.
Okay, so what are the differences in what people expect when they go on the Camino to what they actually experience? So if you're walking in the US and you go to kind of guest houses or hostels, do people get a radically different view of what it's like in Spain and Portugal once they arrive?
That's a hard question to answer. I'd like to talk about something that one of our chapters, actually the Old Pueblo chapter here in Tucson, has done. And a returning pilgrim bought an old inn in a small community in Arizona and turned it into a bed and breakfast. And she has opened it up to our chapter several times so that new pilgrims who have never experienced this community, a community meal with fellow walkers, fellow pilgrims, and veterans, and sleeping the way we sleep in bunk beds and in rather more rustic type situations to get their first experience. And I think it really, we've done it 3 times. And what people say, especially the ones who have never been on the Camino, is it's not so bad. I was expecting that it was going to be, people snoring and being their feet in my faces because of what I've heard. And there are places like that, of course, but I think more than anything, the spirit of the Camino lives with the pilgrims, and they've been able to share that. And I think for some people, it's really made a determination that they are going to do it whenever they can.
Okay, thank you. And one thing I've kind of noticed kind of on the Camino myself and talking to people, a lot of people do the Camino either because they are at a stage in life where something is changing dramatically and they're looking for the answer or the next step, or something kind of big has happened to them. There's been a big event, whether it's kind of a bereavement or change in relationship or job loss, and they just want time out to think about what is next. Would that be your experience? Like, do you see or hear many people like that?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think one of the unexpected, maybe unanticipated benefits of walking the Camino that folks don't recognize until afterwards is the opportunity to slow down and actually notice things and think about things. At the pace that information comes today and at the pace of our lives, I think a lot of times you forget a lot of the good that's out there. And when you slow down enough to see it, it's really everywhere. Even in a country where you don't speak the language and you can't just communicate directly with folks. As I walked the path, I found that people were just incredibly helpful. There was always somebody willing to lend a hand, and that sort of even changes the way that you interact as you go in, and you see other people in need, or you see other people that might require something. You're more willing to lend a hand. So I think that slowing of the pace is a huge part of it. That folks, if they don't know that's coming, I think walk away with a strong sense of when they're done.
Yeah, I noticed myself that the sense that there was no deadline. You're not rushing to get somewhere to stop and do something else. You get up in the morning, you walk, you arrive maybe mid-afternoon, and you've got plenty of time until the next morning, get up, do the same thing again. And it's
right.
It's unique. It's not, in modern society, you don't really get that.
It also sort of reinforces the importance of a routine. We did that in how far you can actually get if you just keep plugging away at it and you keep working at it, and you develop that routine on a daily basis. I don't know what you think.
Thank you.
I've had the opportunity to serve as an hospitalero 4 times in Spain and France. And I've been surprised at the number of people who are repeating the same Camino, because the first time they went, they did rush through it. They did have a timeline. They felt that if they had 30 days, or that they just had to be someplace at a certain time. And they came back and did exactly the same walk, and said, but I'm going so much more to enjoy the moment. Because I know that it can be different than it was. It was a great experience, but I know it can be different. And I think slowing down, like Dave said, once you get the bug, you know that you can do this.
Yeah, it is. And Carmen, do you prefer walking on your own or in a group? Like, what does a day look like walking?
For me, I have walked with many people, with one person, and by myself. Personally, I like walking by myself the best, but it took me a while to get there. It took me a while. I walked with my 21-year-old son one time, and that was a very different challenge than walking with 4 other women versus one other friend. And I think you get into that habit of walking becomes part of your life. And for me, the last couple of years that I've walked by myself in probably my best personal Camino or my personal development. But my other ones have been fantastic.
Thank you. And David, I noticed when you did your first Camino in 2013, you also walked with your older son. We see a lot more, I suppose, intergenerational and multi-generational groups going on the Camino, which is great to see. Is that something that you wouldn't do in the US? Would you have the time to walk with your family for a few days or a week?
Yeah, I think in the United States, it's a little bit different in that we have some long distance trails, the Pacific Crest Trail, the Appalachian Trail, that sort of thing. That's a little bit more rustic. And so you don't have the same level of infrastructure. So it doesn't encourage, I think, the same type of walking. It's more, my perspective on that is a little bit more of an endurance test on some of the trails. Whereas the Camino, you're actually walking through the towns and villages of Spain. There's more infrastructure and more support there. So it's more conducive to walking. I did walk with my wife and my oldest son on the first Camino, and then my wife and I have done 2 additional ones together. And I think your question on walking alone versus walking together in a group is a good one, because we did both. I mean, even though we were together, there were times where we walked at different paces, or we'd be on a bike, and we. Did we lose you?
No.
Oh, you're still there? Okay, I thought I saw somebody drop off. I'm sorry. And so it varies, and I think it doesn't have to be one or the other. You can combine that and spend some time alone and have that time to think, but then still enjoy it together as a family.
Okay, so changing topics slightly, 2021 is what they call a holy year. Can you maybe talk about what a holy year is and why it's more important on the Camino?
Well, I think this holy year in particular, I think, is important. The St. James feast day occurs on a Sunday, which is what delineates that. And those are anywhere between 5 and 6 years apart, and 11 years apart, depending on the year. And this one, I think it's been 11 since the last one, and so that coming up next year is going to be quite a special event. And it's going to be interesting to see how the COVID-19 crisis is going to impact that. I think I've heard 2 schools of thought on that. One, that it may cause folks to pull back, and they may have a lower population on the Camino due to maybe some of the impacts on the infrastructure there. But on the other hand, I've also heard, I can tell you, just the sense in the United States of wanting to get back there and walk those pathways is pretty strong. And so, my personal view on that is, I think, given the holy year and the amount of time since the last one and the events of the day, I think I would not be surprised to see a strong population on the worldwide population on the Camino. And that's going to require, I think, our continued support. Carmen can talk more about the grants, but we've had a good discussion among our board on our grants program and the importance of that going forward to support the Camino infrastructure, particularly after this year.
Yes, so Carmen, so I understand the American Pilgrims on the Camino have been kind of supporting various projects over the last 10 years or so in Spain and Portugal, and I think you've supported maybe over 75, 80 projects. Maybe can you talk about that, what that support actually means, and how you raise money and where it goes?
So I'd like to start with, we are a nonprofit, and all of our money comes from either membership dues or donations. And that's the only source of, we don't go out and seek money from others. It's donations and membership dues. And yes, our program has been in place in full swing for the last 10 years. We've given close to $400,000 out over 85 projects, counting this year's projects. We've not yet dispersed the money, but we've approved the grants, and we've heard back from our recipients that they need the money just as much now, if not more so than they did before, to complete their projects. And these projects are to develop the infrastructure. We don't fund operating costs. We're not allowed by US law to do that, but the infrastructures can be anything from repairing a roof to putting a water cistern in place, to waymarking, stone markers or other kind of markers, washing machines, mattresses, just about anything that you need to run an albergue, we have funded. It's a competitive process. We have much more requests than we have money for, but we have averaged about between $45,000 and $50,000 a year over the last 10 years. Started off much smaller in the early years, but it's a loved project by our members. It's part of what gets them very interested in supporting the Camino because they've stayed at these places. And our hospitaleros, sometimes we have funded like a separate bathroom for an hospitalero instead of sharing with 60 other people. If you're there for 2 weeks, you would get your, in Ponce de Leon, we put a new bathroom in for that. And it makes for the ability to be of service to pilgrims much easier. And it makes the place for the pilgrims a much better place to stay too. So we consider it kind of our flagship program, if you will. And love to talk to you about more, whatever you want to. I could go on and on.
No, it's great that you're in a position to actually provide support like that and help. I'd like to touch on service. So the hospitalero, that is actually about giving service to other pilgrims. So maybe just briefly for people that don't know what a hospitalero is, perhaps you could explain.
For us, we consider an hospitalero to be a person who has gone through training, and the Spanish Federation has trained us to train. We've trained over 650 hospitaleros to date, and more than 300 of them have served either in Spain, France, or Portugal Federation. And these are self-reporting. We do not place anybody. They go through the training. And in Spain, you do a 2-week tour. You get assigned where you are needed and on the dates that you're able to go. And some of the places are more rustic than others. Yeah. Some of them you do, and you've been on the Camino, you have Camino meals, and so you'll be responsible for the cooking. Some places have some paid staff to do some cleaning, but others are pretty remote, and it's just you and another person, and you will do cleaning and cooking and greeting and changing sheets and washing, whatever. The main thing is that you are welcoming pilgrims and being there for them. Whatever they need, if they need somebody to listen to them, if they need help with a pharmacy, if they just need to be with you, that's what we do. And it's a very, very gratifying experience. And many of our volunteers have served more than once and just come back with just such a wonderful way to be of service and to be part of that community.
Okay, thank you. And David, what does a typical pilgrim look like? What sort of age range, background, motivations?
I will tell you, that's an interesting question. I think at our most recent gathering in Lake Tahoe this past March, we had, I don't know, started with somewhere around 200 people. We had, this whole epidemic or pandemic was beginning to form. And so, but I'll tell you, we had such a wide variety of ages and backgrounds that I don't think there's any one standard description of a pilgrim. We had individuals retired in their 80s, and we had some very young folks, in their early 20s, who were there to learn about the Camino and hear about the experiences of others. So I think it's impossible to pin down a specific description of a pilgrim. It's really anybody who seeks that experience.
Okay. And is the Camino, is it difficult? Is it physically challenging? Like, are the people that cannot do it?
Yeah, I found I think it depends on the trails you choose, and it depends on the mode of transportation you use. Obviously, there's the traditional method of walking, and I think there are times that people have this sort of preformed opinion of where you're supposed to walk from and to, but that's really irrelevant. If you think back historically, it was wherever your front door was, walking to Santiago. So I think a lot of times the pilgrimage can be tailored to the specific limitations. I mean, we've seen plenty of examples. Some movies have been made and some documentaries have been made about people in wheelchairs being pushed along the Camino. And we've seen, I've personally met all ages walking different pathways. I think the most important thing is probably to remember that there's no set formula. The pilgrimage is yours individually, really, and you go and you sort of take what comes, and if you find challenges, you find ways to overcome those. And the beautiful thing is, typically, you'll find plenty of people on the Camino willing to help you overcome those challenges and reach your goal.
Thank you. So, walking on the Camino as a pilgrim, a lot of people stay at albergues, which are kind of hostels, I suppose. And a lot of them you cannot pre-book, you have to arrive. Have you ever had experiences when you've arrived at a village or town and not been able to get a bed?
I don't know about you, Carmen, but I really haven't. I went during the busy time of the year. What I was told was the busier time of the year in the summer of 13. And I never had a problem finding a bed. And I know that can become more and more of a challenge. And again, with the pace of information and the pace of our lives today, I know a lot of people worry about that. But I will tell you, I did arrive in one town just short of Santiago, and it was a pretty small town, and there were no beds there. But I talked to one of the owners of a small establishment who then made a phone call for me, and an individual family who had an accommodation came and picked me up and took me to stay at their place and shared a meal with my wife and I, and that was just an incredible experience. And then the next morning, they said, "Hey, wherever you walk to next," they took us back to where they picked us up. And at the end of the day, they said, "Hey, give us a call. We'll be happy to come get you again if you need a place to stay." And we said, "No, it's okay. It's far." And he said, "It's far for you, not far for me." And so I actually stayed with that family a second night, and just incredible hospitality. So,
yeah, that's amazing.
I have had the experience of not being able to find a bed at the albergue, but I think most of the time I had planned that if it wasn't available, I could either walk a little bit further, or I had a little bit of money to put aside so I could stay in a hotel. In the few instances where it was really crowded, and this was early on the Camino del Norte, where the infrastructure was much, much less developed than it is today, even 6 years ago. The generosity and the spirit of the people when they were turned away was really something else. I remember the first time, it was a very small albergue, and we had been walking with a couple of young people, and they just said, "We'll put up our tent and let these 3 other people have our beds, even though we were here first, and just let us sleep here on the camp on the grass, and let us use the bathroom, and we'll give up our beds, no problem." Very, very infrequently have I seen people get so uptight about not being able to stay at the albergue that might be a donativo, or if it was a municipal and you knew you were only going to have to pay €6. Most people have been just very, very gracious about the fact that they didn't really, they wanted this, but they didn't plan. Sorry.
No problem. Okay. I'm only going to keep you for a couple more minutes now, because I really appreciate you both taking this time, and perhaps maybe at a future date we could have some further conversations about your kind of grand program and other things. But this year is the 10th anniversary of the first screening of the Way movie with Martin Sheen. Now, my understanding is that's the number one thing that has introduced the Camino to almost any American that has been on the Camino. Is that true?
It's the inspiration, I think, for a lot of folks, including myself. That's how I'd never heard of the Camino de Santiago until I watched that movie. I actually watched it on a plane as I was traveling back to the United States from Guam. And I watched it, and my initial reaction was, I have to go. And I told my wife that, and her initial answer was, "We'll see you at the end." And ultimately, though, as I did some more research, and that's how I found American Pilgrims on the Camino. Um, my wife jumped right in, and eventually I caught her at a sports store looking at backpacks, and so she was hooked, just like I was. But yeah, that movie I think does serve as the sort of the introduction for a lot of folks to the Camino, at least on this side of the Atlantic.
And I would say that, our organization has been a formal and nonprofit entity since 2003. And the founding members started this in the late 90s. So, there's a lot of other things that have precipitated the interest in the Camino over the years, and especially on the academic side. And then as you teach your students about it, they become interested in doing it. But I would say yes, since 2011 or 2010, when the movie came out, you say, well, how did you hear about the Camino? That's by the way. So
Carmen raised a good point. It's interesting to know that the American Pilgrims on the Camino really started with a very small group of individuals who wanted to share their experiences with each other. And it was essentially folks gathering in living rooms. And over the years, that's expanded to now this annual gathering where, we gather together 200 or 300 people from around the country. And thousands gather monthly in our 60 chapters across the country. So it's amazing to see how it's expanded. And the movie helped that. But I think every now and again, it's important to remember it started with just a few people who decided they wanted to get together and share this amazing experience.
Yes, it's interesting. Like earlier on this week, I was talking to two people from the Canadian Company of Pilgrims, Mary Virtue and Tom Friesen, and they said the same thing, that their organization got started some time ago because there was very few people interested in looking at photographs of people's Camino journey. So they got together 2 or 3 people, formed a chapter, and that's how it grew from there.
Right.
Very true.
Yeah.
So one last question for you, Carmen. What's your funniest memory of the Camino?
Carmen, you're gonna have to go first on that one. Let me think about that. I have a lot of funny ones.
I don't know that I have a funny one. I have more poignant memories of acts of kindness and generosity as opposed to funny. I guess some of the language differences have been pretty funny to listen to people talk about being pregnant instead of being embarrassed, and you're really trying hard to communicate with people. But I guess my memories are much more of just the random acts of kindness and generosity. Dave, something funny.
Oh, I guess the funniest time I had was interacting with the folks in the local communities. I had Spanish. I took Spanish courses in high school and college, but I never, and I regret this, I never actually became conversant in Spanish. And so as we went on this, initiated this planning, we went back to probably what a lot of people do in an app or Rosetta Stone or something like that to try to learn some basic Spanish. And so I was in a small village in a grocery store looking for just some provisions to throw in my pack. And I had a line of local folks behind me, and the cashier, I attempted to use a couple words of Spanish, and she smiled, and she said, "Habla español?" And I said, "Oh, just a little bit." And so she wanted me to demonstrate it, and I said Rosetta Stone, and she smiled really big, and the people behind me started to giggle a little bit, and then I said, "La bicicleta es roja," and she said, "Oh, okay, good," and I said, "Nope, sorry, that's it," and everybody laughed. She laughed, and the people in line were just giggling uncontrollably, and so we all shared a moment there, which was pretty funny.
Very good, very good. Well, listen, David and Carmen, I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to you. I really hope both of you will be on the Camino in 2021, as will a lot of people. But thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we'll speak again in the near future.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Buen Camino.
Buen Camino.
Have people look at our website, www.americanpilgrims.org, for more information about finding a chapter in their area or about our grants program. And thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today, Sean.
Thank you, Carmen.